Hare Krishna. Um, Today I would like to start on a systematic study of one of the books that Prabhupada gave us. The foundational books that Prabhupada gave us is Nectar of Instruction, and it is an English translation of the book originally written by Srila Rupa Goswami, and that book was named Upadeshamrita. Prabhupada translated that book in English and gave the title as The Nectar of Instruction. So, why this book specifically to begin with? See, the Vedic text has a lot of verses covered in them, and Srimad Bhagavatam, which was the most important literary contribution of Srila Prabhupada and many other acharyas in our line, has 18,000 verses, whereas Bhagavad Gita, which is again read and accepted by almost every sampradaya, every Vaishnava lineage, has 700 verses in them. And if you see the number of verses each one of them covers, is quite a lot. Bhagavad Gita speaks about philosophy, very great philosophy, whereas Srimad Bhagavatam is just an elaboration of that philosophy with pastimes attached to it. However, the Nectar of Instruction has 11 verses. It's just like 1% or 1.5% of the verses that Bhagavad Gita has to offer. But these 11 verses, Rupa Goswami, I believe, has taken the most essential instructions from all the scriptures and compiled them into just 11 verses. If one studies these 11 verses, his Krishna consciousness can be advanced at altogether a different level. But apart from that, these verses are, the instructions given in these verses is something so beautiful that one can actually practically apply them in his own life. Not only in the spiritual circle, but also if one wants to advance materially. And that is the beauty of it. We can learn many management principles even from Nectar of Instruction, but not only that, we can learn things which can excel us in our profession and our careers. So without delay, I would like to go ahead and focus on the verses. So I'll begin with the text 1. I'll begin the text 1. Text 1 says, I'll read the Sanskrit and the English translation as given by Prabhupada. Vacho vegam manasakroda vegam jiva vegam udarupasta vegam itan vegan yo vishaheta dira sarvam apimam prithvim sasishyat. Translation: a sober person who can tolerate the urge to speak, the mind's demands, the actions of anger, and the urges of tongue, belly, and genitals, is qualified to make disciples all over the world. Sarvam apimam prithvim sashishya. So, I'll read the translation once again. A sober person who can tolerate the urge to speak, the mind's demands, the actions of anger, and the urges of tongue, belly, and genitals, is qualified to make disciples all over the world. Now, this is a very important point. You go to any other spiritual circle or any religious circle, everybody wants to make a person as a disciple. You become a shishya, you become a disciple, you become a student. Nobody teaches how to become a guru. So this Gaudiya Vaishnava lineage, the prominence is, it teaches how to become a guru. That is the beauty. See, Rupa Goswami Pad also has said here, become a guru. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's instruction is also to become a guru. He is not asking you to become a disciple. He is asking you to become a guru. But in order to become a good guru, you have to become an excellent disciple. So here is the point. And see, in order to become a guru, in order to become a leader, Sarvam Pimam Prithvim Sa Shishya, what is required? There are 6 items that are required. 6 items, Rupa Goswami says. And these 6 items are under one's control. He doesn't say you need to have an MBA degree. You have to become a CEO of the company. No. Rupa Goswami says if you have these 6 items, you can become an excellent leader. So what are these 6 items? He says, this is the urge to speak, the mind's demands, the actions of anger, the urges of the tongue, belly and genitals. These 6 items, once when controlled, that person can become an excellent leader. And we will discuss how these 6 items can be controlled. The first one is the urge to speak. Every person has tendency to speak something. Every person, though he may have nothing substantial to speak about, but he will have an opinion. And he wants to speak. Whenever given a chance, we keep on speaking. But you know, a person, especially in the human form of life, a living entity in the human form of life, he should control his urge to speak. Now, what does this mean to control the urge to speak? Does this mean that he doesn't talk at all? No. He talks, but how are his talks? See, every activity that a human being does based on Gita, it can either be binding or liberating. Binding in a sense that every activity you do, it can either have good or bad result, or it can be liberating. Now, good or bad result, both of them are binding. Why? Because if you do good activity and there is good result, you have to take birth or you have to enjoy the result for that. If it is a bad activity, then you get a bad result for which you have to suffer. So both good and bad, they both are binding because you have to either enjoy or suffer the results of this. Whereas liberating are those activities which does not create a result. They are liberating. So what are these activities? These activities are the activities done in complete consciousness of Krishna. This is totally again based on the knowledge of Bhagavad Gita. Now this good and bad activities that we perform, which as I mentioned are binding, are based on the conception that I am going to enjoy or suffer. So eventually they are based on sense gratification. Whereas the acts based on liberating are the activities that are based on the pleasure of the Supreme Lord. So just to give an example, we take an example from Mahabharata. On the battlefield of Kurukshetra, there were 2 personalities fighting. One was Arjun, another was Duryodhana. Arjun, both were engaged in the same act of fighting. but the activity, but for Arjun it was liberating because he was acting, he was fighting on behalf of the Supreme Lord. Whereas Duryodhan was engaging in the same act of fighting, but he was fighting with the motive for enjoying the kingdom. So every activity you do, it can be either binding or liberating in the first sense. So activity by itself is neither good or bad. The consciousness that one carries behind that activity will govern whether it is liberating or binding. So even this activity of speaking, it can be either liberating or binding. How? So that is why one has to control the urge to speak. If a person only speaks all the topics except Krishna, then it is liberating because it develops attachment for different material objects. And unless a person has, and eventually because of not speaking about Krishna or topics related to Krishna, then this person at the time of death, he will be scared. Every person is scared of death. But if a person has spent his life discussing topics about Krishna, then he is not scared of death. Because death becomes a transparent, just a change of body, and it becomes a motivation for eternal life. So one can control his urge to speak by engaging in talks related to topics about Krishna. And that is why even Rupa Goswami says that this artificial process of silent meditation doesn't help. In Sanskrit it is called Mauna Vrat, where people just decide that they won't utter a single word for the whole day or for a whole week or for a whole month. And that is an artificial process of controlling the urge to speak. Whereas Rupa Goswami says, Prabhupada actually elaborates in the purport, where they say that you can control the urge to speak by engaging in the positive process of engaging in Krishna Katha. And Bhagavatam has a very beautiful verse to say in this regards. It says in Canto 2, Chapter 3, Text 17, Ayur harati vaipumsam udyanastachayanaso tasyarthayachano nita uttama shloka bhartaya. It says, by rising and setting of the sun, by rising and setting, the sun takes away the duration of life from takes a day from everyone's life. And everyone is going nearer to death by rising and the setting of the sun, except a person who is engaged in discussing Krishna Katha. Uttama Shloka Varta. Uttama Shloka is another name for Krishna, which means one who is glorified by transcendental songs. So when one engages in the discussion of Krishna Katha, then he becomes liberated from the clutches of death. So does this mean that he never dies? No. This means that this death that he is going to experience is his final death. After that there will be eternal life for him, where he'll be constantly engaged in discussing Krishna Katha. And because of that, this change of body at the time of death becomes a motivation for him. This old age and disease for a devotee becomes a motivation for eternal life after death, to engage in Krishna Katha. So one can control the urge to speak by engaging in the process of Krishna Katha. So one can, and this process of Krishna Katha, one can engage by hearing and chanting in the beginning. One has to hear in order to repeat and chant. And hearing has to be done very attentively. So this is the way one can control the urge to speak. Now, the second one is to control the demands of the mind. See, mind is very difficult to control. Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita discusses 4 qualities of mind. In chapter 6, text 34, Arjuna says, Chanchalam hi mana Krishna pramati palavadridham tasyaham nigraham manne vayuriva sudushkaram. Arjuna says these 4 qualities. That, O Krishna, the mind is very turbulent, obstinate, very strong and restless. And it is very difficult to control. It is easy for me to control the wind. Just imagine. Arjuna says, I can control the wind, but I cannot control the mind. So what is the formula Krishna gives? Krishna says, Asamshayam mahabhavo mana durnigraham chalam abhyasena tu kaunteya vairagyan chagrehate. Krishna is saying undoubtedly it is difficult to control the mind. He is appreciating this point as said by Arjuna. But then he gives 2 formulas. He says by constant practice, abhyasena tu kaunteya. And then he says, vairagyana chigrehate, by detachment. So I'll elaborate on this a little later. But mind has 3 functions: thinking, feeling, and willing. It keeps on thinking about something, it analyzes all the feelings, and it keeps on desiring something, willing. And then the fuel is provided by the intelligence. But then one can control his mind by thinking about how to serve Krishna best. If one engages one's mind in thinking about how to serve Krishna best, then gradually mind can be controlled. Else it is very difficult to control the mind. And especially in this day and age, Kali Yuga, where mind can get agitated by any of the senses, it becomes very difficult to control the mind. And when one's mind is agitated, it can take you to many places and can show you horror movies about one's life. And can reason unreasonably well. It can tell you how bad your past was, and it will show you how horrifying your future can be if you don't enjoy right now. But mind has to be controlled. And Bhagavad Gita says a controlled mind is a best friend, but an uncontrolled mind is the worst enemy. So how to control? By constantly thinking about how to serve Krishna's interest best. Now when I say this, does it mean that one quits one profession and one's job and just takes up monkhood and moves into a monastery? No. We take the example and from teachings of Bhagavad Gita. And that is why it's very beautiful. Krishna never recommended an impractical solution in Bhagavad Gita. He always recommended a very practical solution. So even Arjuna, he is telling Arjuna that you are a warrior by profession. You should never quit your profession. But you should fight in the war thinking about me. Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mahamanusmara yuddhacha mayarpita manobuddhi. He says, you have to fight, but do that as a service to me, by thinking about me. And one can do that very well. See, every person, and in order to control the mind, this process of bhakti yoga is very helpful. This process of, bhakti yoga, yoga means to connect. Yoga doesn't mean some gymnastic physical exercises. Yoga means to connect, and in order to connect, there have to be 2 points. You just cannot, 2 points or more than 2 points. You just cannot connect with a single point. So this yoga is to connect the individual soul with the super soul, or with Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And the easiest way to connect is this process of bhakti yoga. Why? Because bhakti yoga is purely based on love and devotion. And every person has love and devotion. One cannot deny this fact. Every person has a tendency to love something or someone. And every person desires to be loved by someone. So this process of bhakti yoga, which requires the essential tools, are available with everyone. That is love and devotion. The only thing is, somehow they have to be connected to Krishna. And that can happen when one takes shelter of a bona fide spiritual master who is expert enough to guide the disciple on how to engage one's skills in service of Krishna. This bona fide representative is a representative of Krishna, so he doesn't speak anything impractical. That's the first point we have to understand. Krishna never told Arjun to quit fighting and go in the forest. No. So in the same way, a spiritual master will not tell a disciple who has excellent qualities to quit those and do something else. If those qualities can be used in the service of Krishna, they should never be rejected. So an expert spiritual master knows how to engage each and everyone's quality in service of Krishna. We see this example from the life of Srila Prabhupada. He had disciples coming from all over with all different capabilities. And Prabhupada was very smart enough to engage each and every disciple with their abilities in service of Krishna. So when one engages in the service of Krishna and one keeps on thinking of how to improve his service for Krishna, then one's mind can gradually be controlled. So this is the point on how to control the mind. Prabhupada in the purport writes a very beautiful sentence. However, if one always thinks of Krishna and how to serve Krishna best, one's mind will naturally be controlled. So then the third point is about controlling anger. Again, controlling anger altogether is very difficult. But then how do we control anger? We again learn this from Bhagavad Gita. And we again learn this from Ramayana. There are examples in both the scriptures. So who are these examples? Bhagavad Gita, of course, the example is Arjuna. Whereas in Ramayana, the example is Hanuman. See, both of them, they were excellent servants of the Supreme Lord. And Arjuna, he was a very soft-hearted person. Very soft-hearted. Though he was a warrior by profession, but he was a very soft-hearted person. How I can say this? Because he was the devotee of the Lord, and we can see this in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita itself. He was not ready to kill anyone. He said, it is better I live in the forest. I feel kind enough that I leave them. But Krishna incited anger in him, and without anger it is impossible to fight. So then, when the anger was incited, Arjun used that anger in the service of the Lord for fighting. Because for fighting you should be angry. A warrior on the border fighting with terrorists is angry. He just cannot fight without anger. It has no meaning. In the same way we see Hanuman. He was very angry with Ravana. And the way he punished Ravana, he used his anger by sending a message to Ravana that how powerful only one servant can be of the Supreme Lord, by burning the whole Lanka. So, this anger, when utilized in the service of the Lord, then it can be controlled. But artificially, it is very difficult to control anger. Very, very difficult to control anger. And we see this. And anger, it has to be applied correctly. So Hanuman and Arjun, they were able to do it. And that is why from their examples we learn this. And then anger can be controlled. Else a person should learn to be soft-hearted. Now, so out of the 6 urges, the urge to speak, the demands of the mind, and the actions of anger, then there are the remaining 3. To control the tongue, the belly, and the genitals. Now, if one analyzes the tongue, belly, and genitals, they all 3 come in a straight line. What does that imply? If you can control the tongue, the belly and the genitals will automatically be controlled. What does this mean? So let's analyze this. Tongue has 2 functions. It keeps on speaking and it needs good food to taste. Now, controlling the tongue means that you have to control what you eat and how much you eat. Your tongue can easily be controlled when you just decide that I eat only the foodstuff that is offered to the Lord. It is a little austerity to do it. It is not easy, but it is worth it. Offerings to the Lord, Krishna says what his diet restrictions are. He says, Patram Pushpam Phalam Toyam. So, you can offer him a leaf, a fruit, vegetable, grains, milk, water. These are some of the things that Krishna consumes. He doesn't eat meat. And meat actually is not good. See, we have existences on 4 different levels. We have an existence on the physical level, we have existence on the mental level, we have existence on the intellectual level, and we have existence on the spiritual level. Now, on the physical level, the way you can control very primitively is by controlling what goes inside your mouth. One should be conscious that one's stomach is not a graveyard, which means he doesn't eat meat. And at the same time, a stomach is not a compost bin, because when you eat excessively, all the food that you eat, excess food, is all decomposed in the stomach. Rather than supplying energy to the body, it will suck more energy. Scientifically and spiritually, When one eats more than required, eventually he becomes dull and lazy. So it is better one can control his eating by, by honoring the food stuff that is offered to the Lord and limiting one's diet to those food stuff. Gradually, by consuming food stuff on that level, one's mind becomes more inclined toward transcendental knowledge. These are some of the side benefits. By controlling the tongue, where you engage your tongue in only honoring food stuff or eating food stuff that is offered to Krishna. And then gradually the belly is also controlled. And when we eat less, Ayurveda says the best medicine is to fast. If one is fasting, then gradually diseases also leave the body because there is nothing to feed the disease. This does not mean that one starves, but one takes his food in a very controlled way. Then controlling the genitals. Now controlling the genitals have two purposes. One is to discharge urine and another is to discharge semen. Semen is used for a specific purpose to beget child, and genitals should only be used when a person wants to beget a Krishna conscious child. Then automatically genitals will be controlled. And this process of begetting Krishna conscious child is done through our Krishna conscious process encourages marriage so that one can have Krishna conscious children. It doesn't encourage marriage for the satisfaction of the genitals. So one can control his genitals only by begetting Krishna conscious children. And begetting Krishna conscious children is a great responsibility also, because one has to purify one's mind before they conceive a child. And that can be done by engaging one's mind in thoughts of Krishna through the process of chanting. That is why Prabhupada gave a process that you chant at least 50 rounds before you conceive a child. When your mind's thought is very, very focused on Krishna, the child that you get is actually an act of liberation, both for the parent and for the child. And that is needed. As I said earlier, the activity by itself is neither good nor bad, is neither binding nor liberating. The consciousness that goes behind it is what makes it liberating or binding. So this activity of sex is neither liberating nor binding, it depends on the consciousness. And to purify one's consciousness is not easy unless one engages in the process of bhakti yoga, which begins through the process of hearing, chanting and remembering. In pure form of bhakti yoga, there is no other activity other than hearing, chanting and remembering the Supreme Lord. There is no other activity. But gradually we haven't engaged in the pure form of bhakti yoga because we have impure desires and we have tendencies to act. So that is why Krishna has given a whole range of activities to engage in. We can dovetail all our activities through the process of bhakti yoga. So this is very important. I would like to read one part of the purport where Prabhupada is actually citing his spiritual master, and this one paragraph I feel is very strong because it gives a message very bold, but if one can practice it, it is very, very helpful. Prabhupada writes in the purport that in his Anuvritti explanation of the Upadeshamrit, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur writes that our material identification creates three kinds of urges. The urge to speak, the urges or demands of the mind, and the demands of the body. When a living entity falls victim to these three types of urges, his life becomes inauspicious. One who practices resisting these demands or urges is called a tapasvi, and one who practices austerities. By such tapasya, one can overcome victimization of the material energy, the external potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now, how these six urges, if you can control, how does it help in becoming one a good leader? Because here it is said in the translation we read, right? If a sober person who can tolerate the urge to speak, the mind's demands, the actions of anger, and the urge of the tongue, belly, and genitals is qualified to make disciples all over the world, what happens then when one controls these urges? These urges, these are some very strong austerities. And because of that, what happens is one can overcome victimization by the material energy. A person who is victimized by the material energy, how can one figure out that whether oneself or somebody else is a victim of material energy? There are two symptoms, Prabhupada writes in Bhagavad Gita. The first one is he associates himself with this material body. He identifies himself with the material body. And the second thing is he tries to lord it over material nature. And both of them are false, if we see. Because a living entity is neither this material body, and in true sense he can never lord anything, including this material body. Both of them are victimization of the material energy. Then what happens when one overcomes this, when one is not victimized by the material energy? Then what happens? He gradually lives in this world but not of this world. What does this mean? He becomes detached. And a person who is detached can be an excellent leader, because attachment to anything in this world ruins up everything. It leads up big organizations, it ruins leaders' lives, it ruins relationships also. Why? Because attachment. Everywhere this selfish attachment, wherever it has occurred, it has ruined life. But when a person becomes detached, then he can lead very nicely. And detachment in true sense can only take place when one is sufficiently deeply attached to Krishna. That is why Prabhupada's purports are important, where he has elaborated each and every point connecting it to Krishna through the process of Bhakti Yoga. So I highly encourage all of you to read this book. I have just given an overview of the purport. Prabhupada has really elaborated quite a lot. There is 13 pages of purport that Prabhupada has written to this one verse. And Prabhupada elaborates quite a lot. He even discusses about how this anger comes from. See, as I said, mind has this activity of desiring. When the desires are fulfilled, it results in greed. When desires are not fulfilled, they result in anger. Now, if one can control this desire, then one can control greed and one can even control anger. And gradually what happens, this greed and anger, these are symptoms of mode of passion and ignorance. Then by controlling this, one can situate himself in mode of goodness, which becomes the platform from where one can go to that mode of transcendental goodness, pure goodness. And when one is situated in pure goodness, one can think about transcendental knowledge. So this is possible when one understands the basics as given in scriptures like Nectar of Instruction. So we will stop here, and if you have any questions, please send out a comment, and if you like the video, please give a thumbs up, because I plan to make all 11 videos for 11 verses on Nectar of Instruction, and then we'll cover another book also. I plan to cover the 4 basic books that Prabhupada has given us: Nectar of Instruction, Sri Ishopanishad, Nectar of Devotion, and Bhagavad Gita. I feel these 4 are very primitive books. When one studied and elaborated and understood, it can change anyone's life. So, thank you very much. Hare Krishna.